I am very excited about the upcoming eclipse at the canyon. There's a total solar eclipse taking place in 1 month. Today is the day of new moon, and as the moon goes back around and goes through its cycle, and when it comes back to the exact point of new moon, this time, 1 month from now, that new moon will be a total solar eclipse. And you can find out how to join us at this total solar eclipse by looking up, just doing a regular search for Eclipse at the Canyon. I will be speaking there. It is in Utopia, Texas, from the 6th of April through the 9th of April. And I'll be speaking and talking about the star myths, pointing out the constellations, which I'm going to show you some in a moment. But other speakers will include Ben from Uncharted X and Russ and Kyle Allen of the Brothers of the Serpent and Luke Caverns. You don't want to miss this incredible event. There's going to be live music. It's a festival. $50 Dynasty is going to be there. Henry and the Invisibles, Mostly Dead, Sucka Please, and Unpaved. So I'm really looking forward. This is going to be a great time. Let me tell you a little bit about a total solar eclipse and why you want to make every effort, if at all possible, to be under the path of totality for this total solar eclipse. So I'm going to read a few passages from an important book written by Jane B. Sellers entitled Death of Gods in Ancient Egypt. And she makes the argument that a total solar eclipse has to do with some of the ancient myths of, in particular, ancient Egypt, as she argues in this book. She explains how important the concept of a total solar eclipse is, how important it is to understand the difference between a total solar eclipse and seeing a partial solar eclipse. So she explains, this is from her book, Death of Gods in Ancient Egypt, quote, "A total eclipse is the most spectacular of all natural phenomena. It is difficult to impress this on those who have only witnessed those that are partial." So if you've only seen a partial solar eclipse, it's a completely different category of event from a total solar eclipse. So back to quoting Jane B. Sellers. J. M. Pasikoff, director of Hopkins Observatory, wrote, quote, so now she's quoting an astronomer from the Hopkins Observatory, from an observatory, quote, "Many people say, I saw the eclipse. It was 99% total. But 99% doesn't count. With eclipses, it is all or nothing. The 99% people don't know what they are missing. People who have seen a partial eclipse may be likened to those who have stood outside an opera house before opening night, watching the beautifully dressed people going in. All the preparations take place and the orchestra tunes up, but just as the opera is about to start, the partial eclipse viewer goes home. He may well be content with what he has seen, but in reality, he has missed the entire show." End quote. So now back to Jane B. Sellers. She's continuing her quote. This is Jane B. Sellers, quote, "I experience the same feelings when friends tell of having seen a total eclipse, but when questioned about the diamond ring effects or the corona or viewing totality with the naked eye, these things they do not remember. I know then that they too have missed the whole show." So that's from Death of Gods in Ancient Egypt by Jane B. Sellers. And then she gives this very extended description of totality. So I'm going to quote some more from Jane B. Sellers. Quote, "Totality can last from a few seconds to a maximum of 7.5 minutes. I'll just interject, where we will be in Texas, in Utopia, Texas, for this total solar eclipse, will be one of the longest periods of totality in the United States. It'll be around 4.5 minutes of totality. That's a good length of totality. I'll talk a little bit about the total solar eclipse. I drove up to Oregon in 2017 from California to see the total solar eclipse of 2017 in Oregon. It was not 4.5 minutes of totality, but it was incredible. So let me go back to this quotation from James B. Sellers. Totality can last from a few seconds to a maximum of 7.5 minutes. Depends on where on Earth you are, and it depends on the solar eclipse in question. All right, back to her quote. The very beginning is the first contact, when the moon just begins to silhouette itself against the edge of the sun's disk. I'll interject again. So when the disk of the moon makes contact with the disk of the sun, that's called first contact. All right, back to the quotation. The period following is called the partial phase, during which more and more of the sun is covered by the moon. And that's what we get to see most of the time during a solar eclipse. We see some degree of partial. The moon has made first contact and it starts to cover the sun, but unless you're under the exact path of totality, you'll never get the second contact. Now back to the quotation. Second contact occurs from 1 to 2 hours after first contact, at the instant when the sun becomes completely hidden behind the moon. Second contact meaning the leading edge of the moon disk has made it all the way across the sun disk and makes contact with the other side of the sun disk, thereby covering the sun with the disk of the moon. All right, so let me go back to the quotation. Second contact occurs from 1 to 2 hours after first contact, at the instant when the sun becomes completely hidden behind the moon. In the few minutes before this second contact, the beginning of totality, the sky noticeably darkens. Some flowers close and birds return to their nests. Because the diminished light that reaches the earth must come solely from the edge of the sun's disk, and consequently from the higher layers of the atmosphere, the sky and landscape take on strange colors. This eerie half-glow is accompanied by a noticeable stillness and cooling of the air. In the last instant before totality, the only parts of the sun that are visible are those that shine through the lower valleys in the moon's irregular profile and line up along the periphery of the advancing edge of the moon, a phenomenon called Bailey's beads. What follows can be viewed with the unprotected and unaided eye. It is a brilliant solitary flash or ball of light that astronomers have named the diamond ring effect. This is the last of Bailey's beads, and it has always appeared infinitely larger to me than the beads that preceded it. The effect is one of a large and brilliant diamond or stone, with the emerging corona being the ring itself. The whole of the magnificent corona next flashes into view. This is the sun's tenuous outer atmosphere and consists of sparse gases that extend from the apparent surface of the moon for millions of miles in all directions. The usual photograph of an eclipse is a corona shot. Amazingly, and especially if it's cloudless, the sky darkens and brighter stars and planets can be seen. It is indeed darkness at noon. The total phase ends with the second diamond ring flash as abruptly as it began. The magnificent flash has come twice, once going into totality and once coming out, always on opposite sides of the sun. I believe that these two flashes are of prime importance in understanding the story of the battle between Horus and Seth, a key myth in the religion of ancient Egypt. I'm still quoting Jane B. Sellers here. I'll continue her quotation. It's just got a little bit over a paragraph to go. So she believes that those two flashes are the sun being covered up by the moon, and they have to do with a battle described in ancient Egyptian texts entitled The Contendings of Horus and Seth, or Set. We don't know exactly how the Egyptians pronounced their words, but we can only guess at them. But Set was the opponent of the god Horus, and there were these battles between them that are recorded in an ancient text called The Contendings of Horus and Set. So as I've already interrupted, I'll just continue a little bit. In that battle, at one point, Set rips out the eye of Horus. And so Horus is a sun god, and if this total solar eclipse, as Jane B. Sellers argues, has to do with the contendings of Set and Horus, then the ripping out of the eye or eyes of Horus, she's going to argue that those brilliant diamond ring effects represent Set ripping out the eye or eyes of Horus. And it's always the two diamond ring effects, one at the beginning of totality, one at the end. All right, so let's finish off this extended quotation from the important book by Jane B. Sellers. Anyone who has witnessed totality will understand how difficult it is to convey the sense of wonder that this phenomenon engenders. After viewing totality on July 11th, 1991, amateur astronomer Barry Slavin wrote, "I hardly know what I did. My carefully laid plans were in ruins. I could not take my eyes off that terrible, wonderful thing there in the sky over our heads. It was every artist's conception of totality, but more brilliant, delicate, and finely etched than I could have ever imagined. The editors," and that's the end quote from Barry Slavin from 1991. "The editors of the magazine Sky and Telescope followed this quote with the comment, quote, 'In truth, we see totality not with our eyes, but with our souls,' end quote." And now Jane B. Sellers finishes off by saying the ending of totality is called third contact. The third contact, when the moon's disk is now making its way back across the sun. It hasn't completely exited the sun, so now we go back into a partial phase. Okay, so back to her quotation. "The ending of totality is called third contact, and here again the eyes must be protected," because we're back in a partial eclipse. "Gradually the partial phases of the eclipse repeat themselves, but in reverse order. At last contact, the moon has completely uncovered the sun." So we get a fourth contact, or last contact, when the moon's disk separates from the sun, end quote. So that's all from Jane B. Sellers' Death of Gods in Ancient Egypt, from pages 34 through 39. Now, I find the book Death of Gods in Ancient Egypt by Jane B. Sellers to be extremely important. I've quoted it extensively in several of my books, and it may be that a total solar eclipse has direct connection to this myth of the contendings of Horus and Set, Set fighting against the sun god Horus. However, while that is possible, that's part of the explanation, I also explain in my 2019 book, The Ancient Worldwide System, in which I look at the myths of ancient Egypt, as well as the myths of many other cultures around the world, ancient India, ancient Mesopotamia, the ancient Maya, the myths of the Pacific, of Polynesia from Maui, the myths of Maui, the myths of ancient Australia, ancient Africa, ancient China, ancient Japan, all in this over 900-page book called The Ancient Worldwide System. in that book I do have some chapters on the myths of ancient Egypt, and in that book I explain that here's a picture of Set that I made back in 2017 when I was getting ready for that eclipse, and yes, it's just like Barry Slavin explains from his 1991 experience of a total eclipse. When you see it in the sky, it's like this alien thing. You cannot take your eyes off of it. The total eclipse is like the sun has suddenly been replaced by, to me it was almost like you could hear a whooshing noise, a roaring noise, like this octopus had surrounded the sun. It was like a monster in the sky. It was amazing. But here's a picture of Set with a total solar eclipse, and the god Set, he's the opponent of Horus, but it's not that he's just pure evil. The gods of ancient Egypt are very subtle and multifaceted, and Set has a lot of positive aspects and also a lot of horrible and negative aspects. But the god Set, he has as his weapon or his implement an adze. This is a tool called an adze. This is a picture of an adze, and you can see that his head even resembles an adze. And that's going to be important as I explain that the story of the Contendings of Set and Horus, in my 2019 book, I talk about a celestial argument in which Horus, and I show the reasons why, is associated with the constellation Hercules, which does have connections to the solar disk, and Set has connections to the constellation Ophiuchus. Now, if you look at the constellation Ophiuchus, you might be able to tell why one of the implements associated with the god Set is an adze, because the constellation Ophiuchus has this central body, and then it has two serpent halves. One serpent half has a head, it's often called the head of the serpent, and then the tail. The tail side resembles an adze in its shape. Here's that shape of an adze again. So you can see why Ophiuchus could be Set holding an adze, and in fact the head of Set looks like an adze. Not only that, but Horus, the sun god, directly above, looks like he's just had his eye ripped out by Set. Where is the eye of Horus? Well, the serpent's head, if you look, where Horus is reaching down towards, there's the serpent's head of Ophiuchus. If you outline that, it could be envisioned as the eye of Horus that just got ripped out. In the text itself, it says that Set rips out the eye of Horus, and then he buries them in a mountain or on a mountain, and they grow up into a lotus. So the bulbs of his eyes that are ripped out grow up into the bulbs of a lotus. Now, Ophiuchus, I've explained this in many different videos and many of my different books and writings. Ophiuchus itself looks like a mountain, okay? So Set takes the eye or the eyes of Horus, plants them on the mountain, and they grow up into a lotus. Now I can prove that that same serpent's head that I'm arguing is the eye of Horus that Set rips out is associated with a lotus, because there's a different myth from a different culture from ancient India, also a very ancient culture with very ancient texts. Ancient India, there is a story about the god Vishnu dreaming the universe into existence as he reclines on the back of the multi-headed serpent, or Naga, Sesha, the Sesha Nag. Sesha is this multi-headed cobra, the Sesha Nag, and Vishnu is sleeping on his back with a lotus growing up out of his navel. Lakshmi is at his feet, but there's a lotus growing up out of his navel. You can see in this artwork, Vishnu is reclining on the multi-headed Seshanag, and he's got a lotus growing up out of his navel. That lotus growing up out of his navel, I argue that Vishnu, in my book, Ancient Worldwide System, you can see lots of additional evidence that Vishnu is associated with Ophiuchus. He's reclining on the back of the multi-headed serpent, the Seshanag. Scorpio is that multi-headed serpent. Ophiuchus is just above, and growing up out of his navel is this lotus that is the serpent half of Ophiuchus with the serpent's head. That is the lotus itself right there growing up out of his navel. That's the same eye of Horus that Set rips out, and then it grows into a lotus. Amazing connection across different cultures. I believe this is all extremely ancient. It comes from a even more ancient, forgotten culture that gave these myths to humanity, and then the different civilizations that arose probably after a great catastrophe had the different pieces, and the myths still contain these ancient connections and these ancient celestial references. So you can see that there's an argument to be made that the contendings of Horus and Set are celestial. That doesn't mean that they are not also related to a total solar eclipse. James B. Sellers makes some good arguments. You can check those out as well. I don't think it's either or. It's quite possible that there's both going on, because sometimes the myths are about constellations, and at the same time you can make an argument for the planets. You know, the different gods, the different planets have the names of different gods and goddesses as well. So with all that said, here is a planetarium image of where the different heavenly bodies will be on that moment of total solar eclipse on the 8th of April this year, 2024. I've positioned this to the longitude and latitude of where we'll be for this total solar eclipse. But here's what it will look like as totality occurs. The new moon, which will be occurring in the constellation of Pisces, will come across the face of the sun. You can see the constellation Pisces there in the planetarium. You can see the planet Jupiter will be, when we're looking to the south from our location in Texas, we'll have to look to the south to see the sun and the moon and the path of the planets and the path of the zodiac. You'll see that Jupiter will be to the left or east as we're looking to the south, and Venus will be to the right or west as we're looking to the south. It may be, as you heard from those descriptions, that we will be able to see some brighter stars and planets during totality. I don't know. During totality in 2017, I was staring at this amazing spectacle of the total solar eclipse. I did not see planets or stars, although it did get noticeably darker. We'll see if we can see those, but this is what the background of stars and planets will be at that moment of totality where we will be in Texas. And then later that night, during this event, I'll be talking about star myths, along with, we'll be getting presentations from all those other fantastic presenters, the Brothers of the Serpent, Ben from Uncharted X, Luke Caverns. There's going to be music. It's just going to be a wonderful time, but we will go out and look at the stars. This is what the stars will look like at about 8:30 that night. You can see, if we look to the east, which is to the left as we're looking to the south here, the left of your screen, that serpent's head will be rising in the east, and then the rest of Ophiuchus will come up later. We'll have to wait pretty late to see Ophiuchus, but everything is rising on the left and moving across your screen to the right, rising in the east, moving across the sky to the west. But I'll just show you briefly some of the constellations that will be up. Starting, we'll go from left to right, east to west. Ophiuchus will be rising. The northern crown will be up in the sky after the sun has gone down and it starts to get dark. We'll be able to see off in the east, Ophiuchus rising, northern crown. If you wait longer, those constellations will obviously get higher in the sky. Boötes is just to the right of the northern crown in this image. He's the herdsman. He's got the bright star Arcturus there in his hip, and his long pipe goes out towards the stars of the Big Dipper. We'll see the Big Dipper. The constellation Virgo is below Boötes in the sky. Virgo is in the zodiac, and in between Boötes and Virgo is the beautiful constellation called Coma Berenices. It looks almost like a cheerleader's pom-pom. It has a dazzling cloud of stars in the pom-pom part of it. We'll point that out. And then the Big Dipper is above the pipe of Boötes, or the handle of it is right next to the pipe of Boötes. We'll see the constellation Leo the Lion. Of course, this is all assuming we have clear skies, which I very much hope that we will. No guarantees of what the weather will be, but it should be beautiful in Texas in April. So the zodiac constellation Leo is above the long cobra hooded serpent of Hydra, and on the back of Hydra are a couple more constellations of Corvus the Crow staring at the bright star Spica in Virgo, and then Crater the Cup. And then above the cobra head of Hydra is the constellation Cancer the Crab. So ahead of the mouth of Leo, Cancer the Crab is in between Leo and the zodiac constellation of Gemini, which, with those two bright stars, Castor and Pollux, the heads of the twins. In between Leo and Gemini, in Cancer, is the beautiful beehive cluster. We'll take a look at the beehive. If we have clear skies, we'll be able to see that in front of the mouth of the lion. You basically draw a line between the mouth of the lion and the heads of the Gemini twins, and then you go down towards the horizon and you'll see the beehive in Cancer the Crab. And then up above Gemini, the bright stars in the charioteer Auriga. Those bright stars, sometimes they get confused with the twins, so I sometimes call those the false twins. I'll point those out to everybody. I'll have a laser pointer. If you've never seen these constellations yourself or been able to confidently really point out their outlines, I will be pointing out their outlines using a laser pointer on the nighttime stargazing, star tours, star myth tours that we'll be doing during this event. And then the bright stars of Orion, most people know the three stars of Orion's belt. We'll see Orion, and below Orion, closer to the horizon, the bright star Sirius in Canis Major. We'll point out the stars of Canis Major. The big dog, also the little dog, will be visible. The little dog is in between Canis Major and Gemini, with the bright star Procyon there. And then over in the west, starting to go down in the west as following the sun, we'll be able to see a little bit of Taurus in the sky as the sky gets dark, and then Taurus will be slipping down below the horizon in the west. But in Taurus is the beautiful Pleiades, so I hope we'll be able to see the Pleiades. After the sun goes down, I'll point out where the Pleiades are for those of you who maybe haven't seen the Pleiades before, if we're able to catch the Pleiades before they go down below the horizon, and I think we will be. So it's going to be a wonderful event. I'm very much looking forward to seeing you there in one moon. So here we are on the new moon. The new moon this month is in between the Earth and the Sun, but not exactly on the same plane to cause a total solar eclipse. So when it goes back around the Earth, it'll get in between the Earth and the Sun again in 1 month. At the next new moon, it will cause a total solar eclipse, the most spectacular phenomenon in all of nature. I am really looking forward to seeing you there.